All right, so is that better? Okay. So people, when I was born, my grandfather, the nurse came to the door at the Brewarrina Hospital, came to the window and opened it, and my dad's brother was there because we had to have someone there from the family. My dad was out, and my granddad was there. And just as the woman opened the window to tell him that his daughter had a son, all these Ghillars come flying around, big noise. Poor old fella, he got wild, he was throwing sticks at him. That's what my uncle told me. And when he got there and that one said, we got a boy, he said, that's Ghillar. And so that's where my name comes from. Now, when we grew up on riverbanks. And one thing that we always heard when we lived on that riverbanks was about the white man and how he just come and squatted on the land and just pushed us off. No talking, and if you didn't get out of the way, they shoot you. Pretty simple. And our story, I found a story that was published in 1886 of a man by the name of Con Bride on our country. And Con Bride said that he got in the interview, and I've got a copy of the interview, where he told his journalists that about his memoirs of coming out there for the first time onto that country, north of Brewarrina on the Cato. And he said that when he came there, they got sick of seeing bullocks and sheep with spears sticking out of their rib cages. And so they had to move the people on. They came and he actually says in the interview that he asked the people would they move. Like, you know, we've been there for all these thousands of years, and some white man comes there and tell us, can you move, please? I've got cattle and sheep here now. Like, you know, anyway, the words just can't describe that type of mentality. But anyway, within 2 weeks after he made that statement, they shot Aboriginal women and children and old people at a place called Hospital Creek, 9 miles east of Brewarrina. And those bones are still laying on the ground. And so when people ask me what drives me, what makes me go and keep going, that's what drives me, that memory. The memory of watching us grow up on riverbanks and being pushed into little areas on our own country. And so getting educated, I think that's the worst thing that happened to me too, for 2 reasons. One is a very smart black fella in our own community is almost ostracised because they reckon he's too smart, that won't piss him off. Yeah? And education does not advantage you at all if you don't know how to keep contact with your people. But at the same time, it taught me how to fight the system. And so 26th January, in Sydney, we were waiting for Billy McMahon to make his announcement about land rights. And what was he going to do with Aboriginal people? We already knew the attitude of the people in Parliament down here, because a bloke by the name of Peter Nixon, who was the Minister for Interior, and another bloke by the name of Billy Wentworth, who was Minister for Flora and Fauna, and Aborigines was included in that. And so they said down there that Aboriginal people, especially in the eastern states, and it's on the transcripts of the Parliament, it's in the Hansard, that Aboriginal people in the east states who've got light-coloured skin and who've got a mixed blood should not think that we have any rights to land because we are no longer Aborigines. Billy Wentworth said in that Parliament down there in 1965 that the Aborigines in the eastern states and the southern states should not think that we have the same rights as those people in the desert and in the Northern Territory and far north Queensland. They were the tribal people, we were the mixed bloods, and we did not have the same rights. And so they tried to separate those rights in that Parliament at that time. And so Billy McMahon comes up with a statement in 1972 on Australia Day that we are prepared to establish a policy to lease land back to Aborigines. Well, that went down like a bloody lead balloon, didn't it? And so we turned up, a handful of us, about 8 of us, turned up in front of Macquarie Street in Sydney, Parliament House. And when we turned up there, it was pissing down rain, but then, you know, we didn't have a shower that morning, so it helped us. I didn't anyway that morning, I remember that. But anyway, we stood in front there, and then there was a motor car pulled up and we were trying to think, you know, there's spies over there because there's a white lady sitting there looking at us. And a black fella jumped out and his name was Kevin Gilbert. And he was the only author at that time who was publishing political poems and political writings about Aboriginal people. And so when we saw him, we were quite impressed, and you know, we were excited by this because we now have a black writer who's a recognised writer to start maybe telling our story. Then we decided that, okay, well, Billy McMahon don't work here, he works in Canberra. And so we went back to a house that was owned by Norma Ingram and a bloke called Gary Williams, who was a Gumbanga man, and Norma Ingram, a Wiradjuri woman. And so we went back to that house, and there were 12 of us. And when we got back there was Paul Coe, Gary Foley, Isabel Coe, Norma Ingram, Gary Williams, Chicka Dixon, Nelda. Then there was young Jenny Munro, who'd just come out of high school, was there with her sister, I think it's Mary. And then there was myself, Tony Curry, and of course Bertie Williams was over at his girlfriend's place. And Bertie, by the way, was supposed to be reporting to Melbourne because he's out on bail, and he was supposed to have reporting rights in Melbourne. So, but I remember him coming to the Clifton Hotel and saying, if you blackfellas start making any moves and you want to do something, come and get me, I'm with you. So I remembered that. And so when we got there, we said, okay, Canberra's the place to go. And quite frankly, I make no apologies for saying this. There was no body put their hands up. We said, who's going to go to Canberra? And out of that group, Paul Coe was there, by the way, and Gary Foley. And so we looked around at each other and nobody put their hands up. And I put my hand up and I said, oh, well, I'll go. Right? And then Billy Craigie, because he's a brother Gomeroi man, he said, well, if he going, I'm going with him. And so Tony Curry said he'll go too. And no one else put their hand up in that house. No one. The opportunity was there. And so to dislike someone or find, you know, and be disrespectful on a day like this here is quite hard to take. But nonetheless, it is what it is. And we don't make any issue of it, but I need to tell that story. And so I make no apologies for being the last man standing, but I will take this fight until I die. I will not stop. We have got a lot of unfinished business. Yeah, a lot of unfinished business. Yeah. So we are here on this 50th day, on this 50th anniversary. And by the way, we did not put that embassy up on the 26th of January. Let's get that very clear. We put that Aboriginal embassy up at 1:45 on the 27th of January. That's when we put that embassy up. And it was night time, and then we were brought down here by a bloke called Nick Azard, who was the photographer and the editor of the Tribune, the communist magazine. And Nick, when we went, Kevin Gilbert took us over there because he knew these guys. And so we went to the Communist Party headquarters in Goulburn Street in Sydney, in the, what do they call it, the Labor House there? Yeah, the Labor House. Anyway, we went in there, and these guys said, we only got $70 cash. We said, well, as long as it paid the petrol, because Nick's volunteered, and all Nick said was, I'll drive you guys, because we had no motor cars, us blackfellas, not a reliable one anyway. Yeah, that would get us to Canberra. And so Nick Azard said, he saw an opportunity because he knew that history was going to be made. And so Nick Hazard said, I'll drive you guys down. And so we got the money, $70, but at least that filled the tank up, right? And then we came down, we drove. We left Sydney at about 9 o'clock at night, and we drove down here. One of the interesting things, some of the conversations that we had coming down, because, oh, by the way, I left out Bertie Williams there. I knew where Bertie was at Enmore. And so I said to Bertie, I said to the guys, I said, oh, we go and get another brother. So we have to swell the ranks a little, you know. And so I went to Enmore and knocked on this door, and all Bertie when he saw who it was, I said, we're going to Canberra, bro. He said, I'm with you. And, you know, that day I was known as the housebreaker, the homebreaker. Yeah, because my brother walked out of that house on his girlfriend and he jumped in that car to come down here and set this up. And so when I hear people talking about how this thing happened, I must say it pisses me off, because that was a brother who knew what he was doing. And so when we got here, we went to another Communist Party house over at Lynon. We had no tents, we just came with the clothes we had on. And the old white fella there, he fed us and gave us feed. And on the way down, before we got there, the conversation that Nick Azard was having with us was, what are you going to do when you get here? And of course, we just looked at each other and said, something. Yeah. We had no plan. Truly, we had no plan. Not a plan in the world. We just coming to Canberra. Yeah. But we knew we had to confront that building down there. We knew that's where we wanted to be. And so anyway, Nick Azard said, the Indians in India, they have a good program. They pour petrol on themselves and burn themselves. Well, that went down like a fucking lead balloon, didn't it? You know, that wasn't going to work with blackfellas. Yeah. Anyway, and then he said, why don't you do a Gandhi? Sit on the steps of Parliament House and go hungry. Starve on a starvation diet. Yeah? Billy Craigie, with his smart-ass attitude, said, mate, we've been fucking hungry for a long time. Yeah? So we don't have to go there. Anyway, so we sat and we said, well, we'll work something out. And we were sitting at the house and the old man said, well, you guys got to really come up with something, you know, impressive, that's going to impress people, and the media will take notice, yeah, because you might only be there for 15 minutes after the police raid you. Yeah. We said, well, we have to do something. And Tony Curry, sitting on the throne down the hall, right, and he was sitting on the house throne with the door open. And then all of a sudden, we heard this voice from down the corridor coming out and said, this is the home of the embassies. And so the name Embassy came from a shithouse at Lynon from a man called Tony Curry. And it stuck. That stuck. And so we had nothing, we had no tents, we had nothing. And the old bloke said to us, he said, well, mate, it's pissing down rain out there. I got nothing I can give you. So what that old man did was he went out to his garage. He said, I just bought a brand new mattress, double bed. So we went out to the garage to see what we could get, you know, to cover ourselves over. And the only thing we could find was a beach umbrella, right? And I always thought it was brown and dark brown. When I looked at the pictures, it's fucking blue. So I got that all wrong. Yeah, that's one I got wrong. Yeah. But when we got, then we got the plastic. So we thought we'd have something to sit on that would stop us from getting wet. And then he had about half a dozen Hessian bags. So we thought, well, we got no blankets, so we'll cover ourselves over with these Hessian bags. And then we raided his cupboard in his office for some manila folders and some cardboard, and we made up some signs. And, you know, we had no wire either. And so I said, so we wrote the Aboriginal Embassy on it. I wrote Aboriginal Embassy on his manila folder. And as I was walking out, this is how ungrateful I was for that man offering all this here. I pinched the lace out of his shoe because I needed to hang something up on that umbrella, right? I needed to put something up there because there's no wire, so I took his lace out of his shoe. And I kept the boys talking. I said, we need that there, so the boys kept talking to him. So anyway, I didn't get to see him later to apologise for taking his laces, but anyway. So when we came down here, he said, why don't you wait till sunrise and put that up? Black fella thinking, by the time we get down there at sunrise, too many white people will be awake. And there'll be policemen awake. So there's only guards down there who are security people in front of that Parliament House. And so when we came down there and we put that beach umbrella up. We watched for the police to go past first, and we had to do a bit of reconnaissance. And so we watched the police cars go past. When the police cars went past, we were counting how often those cars come. And so then by 1 o'clock, 1:45 or nearly 1 o'clock in the morning, we said, right, time, that policeman car gone. let's put that up. So we got out and we drove the umbrella into the ground, put the plastic around us, squatted our black asses on that place, and we never moved. And and there's some pictures of us four sitting there in the dark. It's very dark behind us. There it is there, look, that was taken with a flash. And that was 1 o'clock, about 1:30 after we put that beach umbrella up, yeah? And so when we sat there, a couple of us fell asleep, you know, covering ourselves over and had a bit of sleep, so we had to keep someone up. And anyway, when next morning, just on sunrise, just after the sun came up, there's a wonderful picture of the police commissioner for the ACT police. That police commissioner with someone from the federal police, I think a senior official from the federal police and some other deputy, they came there and they confronted us, and we were sitting on the ground like that. And I remember Commissioner Osborne, his name was, and he looked at us and he said, "What are you guys doing?" We said, "This is a protest." "Oh, how long are you going to be here?" And Billy Craig, he had the quick comebacks, right? Yeah, he was like Tony Abbott. He was better than Tony Abbott. Yeah. But anyway, Billy looked up at him like that and he said, "Until we get land rights." And Commissioner Osborne said, "That might be a long time." He said, "We'll be a long time then." Yeah. And so here we are, 50 years on, and we're still arguing and saying that native title is not land rights. Now, the other thing about that embassy, and what the public don't realise, is when we set that up and we got there, you know, we had this media frenzy that came there, and one of the beauties of it was that we had not realised that the international press had also come. And so when that international press came there and started talking to us, all of a sudden we're in other countries. People are looking at us from other countries. And we've never had that sort of publicity ever since the colonisation of this country. And so that embassy put us in the international arena, made people aware that there was a problem in this country and that Aboriginal people are fighting back. Yeah? And this is the way we fight back. Like, you couldn't get a better scene to start a fight than sit right in their most powerful house in this country and sit right on their bloody lawns. And then all of a sudden, we're told by the lawyers who come over to offer us assistance if we needed it, that about midday the next day, they came over and said, "By the way, that was very smart, guys." Okay, thank you. We appreciate that. Yeah. But we didn't know what he was talking about. But what he was saying, and his name was John Evans, he had his own legal firm here. And John Evans said to us, he said, "You put that embassy demonstration up on a place where they cannot move you. There's no law in this country that allows them to remove you from where you put that embassy." And so that made us feel really good, you know, because, pardon the French, we fucked them at their own game. Now, the other beautiful thing about that is the fact that we then knew that we were under our law on their country, right in front of that place, and we were not going to move. And within 2 weeks, we had tents everywhere. We had brothers and sisters who came from everywhere. The first 3 blokes who turned up at that place to support us 4 days later, mind you, they stole a few cars to get here, right? But they came from Taree, Purfleet Mission, yeah? That's where they came from, 3 brothers. And the police came to us and said, "You know, there are a number of stolen cars. Do you know anything about it?" And we said, "Mate, look, you know, motor cars get stolen all the time. What are you coming to us for?" Yeah? But all those cars were coming to Canberra. Yeah? So anyway, nothing happened. We ended up... then the brothers came from South Australia, they came from Western Australia, and they came and camped with us. And so we had a magnificent embassy with a lot of tents that really emerged quite quickly. And by the way, we did not have a tent. We did not have a tent. We had a beach umbrella. And the next morning at about, I think it was about 9 o'clock, yeah, it was about 9 o'clock, there were 2 women came there with 2 tents. And then all of a sudden I realised that these women were from the Quakers. And not only did they bring the tents, but they bought breakfast for us as well, which was magnificent. Yeah, and the firewood, that's right, they bought the firewood as well. And so there are a lot of people, like a lot of our brothers and sisters back in Sydney, we were moving in a direction where and Brisbane and Victoria, we were all moving in one direction. No matter whether you went to Brisbane or whether you went to Melbourne or whether you were in Sydney or whether you went to Adelaide, we were after the same thing and we were fighting for the same thing. And the unity that we had back then was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary, powerful movement. And I must say this to you, that when that embassy was put up, it united our people right across this country. It gave them the power to fight, the will to fight, and we were not going to take a backward step. And that is evident. On that time, they moved the embassy. And so it was 6 days of 6 months that they passed an ordinance in that parliament. And they passed the ordinance. They started at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon to debate an ordinance to remove the Aboriginal embassy. That was on the 17th, I think it was. No, 16th of July. And they debated an ordinance in that parliament, in the Senate, to give the authority so that they can move that embassy and make it illegal to camp on those grounds within the parliamentary precinct. And by the way, that embassy still sits within the parliamentary precinct from this place. So we're still part of the parliamentary precinct. The only people who can give an order for that place to be removed, not down the bottom, once you get down the steps, it's a different thing altogether. But up on that top lawn where we put that embassy up, this place here has the boundary at the bottom of those steps. The embassy on the top is within the parliamentary precinct. And there's only three people in this country in this country who can say, remove that embassy. One is the Governor-General of this country, because he's operating, right? He's governing this country on behalf of Queen Elizabeth II, who has sovereignty in her name over this country. The people of Australia got no sovereignty over this country at all. It's all in the name of Queen Elizabeth. The second thing is, the second one who can make an order is the President of the Senate. And the third person who can make an order to remove it is the Speaker of the House. And so those blokes there, they're gutless at the best of times. Right? I can't see them moving that embassy. And by the way, I understand that as of last night, the Aboriginal Embassy is now formally on the heritage list. Yeah. That was supposed to be made last night. Yeah, that's right. And the other, so I need to tell some more stories. After we put that up and the mob was gathering, we had a caucus. We established a Black Power caucus, and that caucus consisted of Gary Williams, Gary Foley, Chicka Dixon, myself, Billy Craigie, and Kevin Gilbert. No, Kevin wasn't there then. No, he didn't come down. And that essentially was the caucus. And that caucus, we used to meet here once a week. They'd come up from Sydney and we'd talk about what it is that we're doing. From the second day having that embassy there, we got invited to embassies, every foreign embassy that sits in this place here. We got invitations from every embassy. And Billy and I never ate so wonderful in our life, quite frankly. They laid on some good tucker when they talk to you, these fellas, you know. Not like these politicians here, cheap bars, give you sandwiches, you know. But we went to these embassies and all they were saying to us is, what do Aboriginal people want? We don't want to know your story because we already know about it. We want you to tell us what you want and how we may be able to help you. And you know, to this day, 50 years on, we have not come together to put a plan in place to say how we want this to work and what we want. And part of that problem is simply because we are many nations, many languages, and we all have different priorities, and we've got to respect that. And the Australian government and their advisors are making wrong calls, because you can't create one shoe fits all blackfellas in this country. We are like the United States. That's like telling the Lakota and the Euahlayi Sioux Indians that they got to mix up and take notice of what the Tuscarora over near Chicago and Detroit. It's like trying to tell them they got to come together and work as one. You got no hope in the world. And so what we're doing is we're trying to ask the government, respect the fact that we are different. And when we come together, we will come together in our time when we choose, and we'll make those plans. We'll create that unity. And I hope that 2022 is a year that we can get back to that unity and we can walk together, because we will not beat these bastards if we're all one. If we're divided, we got no chance. Yep. Now, so the other good thing about the embassy was that there was a man called Gough Whitlam who was in opposition at that time. Gough Whitlam paid us due respect. What that man did was he walked out of Parliament House and he came and sat on that lawn with us on the embassy, and he talked with us there. Then we organised for the caucus to meet with Whitlam and his head honchos, right? His head honchos consisted of a bloke called Lionel Murphy, another bloke by the name of Rex, no, what's his name, that bloke who came from here, the politician who came from here, Kep Enderby. There was another bloke by the name of Gordon Bryant, and there was one other fella, Blanchard, I think it was, who was the Deputy Prime Minister. Blanche, yeah. And they came. Now that embassy, if you have a look at that picture, there's a picture of a blue tent. Now that blue tent is a two-man tent. But that was the embassy, and we went into confidential discussions inside that blue tent. Now, if any of you ever saw or stood next to Gough Whitlam, had the opportunity, this man was a giant, right? Not only that, he was smaller than the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, who became first Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Gordon Bryant. And Gordon Bryant was a massive man. And mind you, old Lionel Murphy wasn't small either. But there was Paul Coe, Gary Foley, Chicka Dixon, myself and Gary Williams. How we did it, I got no bloody idea, but we sat in that tent, in that blue tent. There is a picture of us walking out of the tent with Gough Whitlam and Paul behind him, and I'm on the side behind Paul, walking out of that tent. What we discussed in that tent was this: we want you to make land rights possible. Where if you get in October and become the Prime Minister of Australia, we want you to give us land rights. We also want you to make it possible for us to become self-determining, right? And we don't want to go under self-management, we want to go under a self-determination banner. Now, from that day onwards, having had those discussions, one of the wonderful things was that he kept coming over there talking to us about how do we put this into place? How do we make this happen? And so when he got to power, the first thing he said to us was, later in October, because I met him later on down here, the first thing he said to us was this: I can't give you land rights in the States because the state jurisdiction has got nothing to do with the Commonwealth. He said, but we can commence the dialogue. And then he said, but I can give you land rights in the ACT, I can give you land rights in the Northern Territory. And so he focused on creating the Land Rights Act in the Northern Territory, and so he commenced that process to give land rights. He also turned the Office of Aboriginal Affairs into a Department of Aboriginal Affairs. But, you know, one of the things that we were so excited about, we forgot to watch what he was doing, right? And so what they did, how they staffed that Department of Aboriginal Affairs, was that they closed down the administration of Papua New Guinea, because Papua New Guinea was under Australian, governance, and Australia was the protectorate, basically, of Papua New Guinea. And so they closed down that arrangement over Papua New Guinea, and Australia gave them independence. Gough Whitlam gave them their independence. And so they set up their own parliament and took total control. But when he brought all the white administrators back to Australia, he put them all over Australia in the office in the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. And then we realised, hang on a minute, you're bringing people back here who knew how to control natives on a foreign soil. And so you're bringing them back in here to control us. Very clever, very clever. Given on one hand, taking on another. And you're going to hear about this tomorrow when we have Professor Lilienthal is going to talk about how white people and how governments in this country have tricked us and stolen everything just through words that sounded bloody good, yeah? And we're going to be talking about this tomorrow to show our people how they've done it to us and how they continue to do it to us. And so Whitlam then proceeded to keep going. He made a lot of money available. And then we realised, I realised about 30 years later, after spending time in the United States and with the Indians and going around the world looking at countries that have been given independence, when I came home, I realised we were truly hoodwinked by these politicians. It was very clever. And because we had a black power movement in this country that was very centrally focused on what our people wanted and how we wanted it, and we had that power through unity. And these blokes worked a magical trick. And what they did was, they said, we'll fund all your programs. And so they poured money into the legal services. They poured money into the Aboriginal medical services. We wanted them. Yes, we did. They poured money into Aboriginal housing development around the country. And now when I look back in hindsight and look at what happened, money split our people clean down the middle and divided us into many groups. And money killed that Aboriginal power movement. That's what happened. And so when you look at it today, we are struggling and they keep us dependent because they control us through money. Now let me give you just a little example of that. Go to Arnhem Land, go to North Queensland, go to Western Australia. Have a look at all those agreements they got, yeah, with these mining companies. They got these millions of dollars trust accounts. And do you know, them blackfellas are not allowed to get 1 cent cash. Not 1 cent cash. They got millions of dollars in trust accounts. And who's operating these trust accounts? Sub-agencies of the Myers Foundation, sub-agencies of other white institutions who are controlling Aboriginal money. And then what do they do to them? And mate, it's disgusting. When you sit with an old woman in Kununurra, for example, who's all of a sudden, oh, it's time to get some money now from the royalty. What do? They give that old woman an order form. So she had to fill out what she wanted to buy. And then that there was taken out of the royalty money that these white fellas have been paid to administer. And then this old woman went to a shop in Kununurra, and we were there, we actually witnessed this. And she went to that shop, and then she said, oh, I don't want to buy that there, I want to buy a frying pan. Yeah, can I change it because I've got enough money left over? And do you know that shop would not let her buy a frying pan because it wasn't written on the list that she was to buy? Yeah? Now, these are the type of things and how we're still controlled. And so when I look back on that, it reminded me of something that happened in 1982. Myself and Aussie Cruz led a delegation to 5 African nations. And all of this came from here because we had this plan, and I was following through a plan. We ended up and we were meeting with Robert Mugabe at Parliament in Zimbabwe, in Harare. And this man looked at Whitlam and he said, you know, you're the richest country in the world. And he said, I don't understand why you people don't settle the difference and pay compensation to, 500,000 Aborigines? They said, so set this date and pay them all $1 million, man, woman and child. Give them $1 million. And so what happened, he looked at Whitlam looked at Mugabe, and he said to Robert Mugabe, he said, yeah, we thought about that. And there was a Labor man who was an ambassador, his name was Mick Young, he was a former politician in Australia. And Mick kicked me under the table and he said, I know nothing about this. Yeah? So he was worried about me saying something about it. And Whitlam said, we were prepared to do this, but our problem is this. If you look at the population distribution of Australia, all the white people live on the coastal strips and live inland just a little bit around Orange and, you know, that place, they get there, and maybe Dubbo or something, and then you get down to Victoria, all them Shepparton mob and, you know, Bendigo mob, and that's where all the white fellas all congregate, see? You get to Adelaide, they're in the hills there like, you know, like, I don't know, they monkeys up there in that hill there, running around. And then you got Adelaide, and then you got all those little coastal strips. And so Whitlam described this to Mugabe. He said, if we give every Aboriginal man, woman and child $1 million each, those Aboriginal people, 1/3 maybe, will get conned and tricked out of their money, and people will rob them of their money. But he also said this, there's a lot of smart ones. And if we do that, them blackfellas in the centre of Australia and rural remote Australia will be clever and buy all the business houses. And when they buy those business houses, then there's no need for white people to be there offering services to the Aboriginal community. And he said, our concern is that if that happens, then the Aboriginal people will push us back onto the coast. And he said, and then they'll become rich enough and raise enough money, and then all of a sudden they're back there and they're starting to buy houses and allotments in the cities, and we'll be looking for somewhere to live, and they'll be clever enough to tell us, we'll buy your boats and you can go home. Yeah? And that was actually said from one former Prime Minister to another President. So people, when we talk about Aboriginal rights, you got no idea of the fight that we still have left to go. We have to become smart, and we now have the answers. And I will not talk here because it's too long. We're going to talk tomorrow about how we can do this, but it's going to need a lot of people with a lot of guts and determination, and people who are prepared to work together. Thank you.